we got a little bit of feedback from our discussion of Israel and where I compared them to Jim Crow. And I just want to respond a little bit to that and read some of it, because I understand I was being provocative when I, basically called Israel Jim Crow, but for Jews. But I also think like that sort of, that's a light that we need to view Israel's actions as they're dealing with Palestine right now. But let me just read this.
Okay. Can I just say though, quickly though, like it's important for us to come out and say that kind of stuff, because a lot of people are afraid to.
Yep.
So once you plant your flag on that front, which I agree it is like Jim Crow, then you can have a discussion more based in reality, as opposed to being like you're an anti-Semite.
Yeah, and this is just part of this message. So I'm paraphrasing, so don't jump on this iamber too much. But I think it's unfair to equate Zionism with Jim Crow. White Southerners, because there was not an attempt to exterminate white Southerners. Jews during the Holocaust fled Nazi Germany. Then when Hitler took over their new country, they were killed. Do you actually think that Jews who rightfully saw anti-Semitism in Europe were these terrible, horrible people if they were Zionists? And I think, like, obviously no. On an individual level, I think, like, people, especially Jews, responding to rampant and decades, almost centuries, definitely centuries long anti-Semitism in Europe. I have all the sympathy in the world for those folks, but you have to, that's not like the scope that you have to look at a project like Israel about, because Israel as an idea and particularly colonizing that area as an idea didn't just start because of the Holocaust. It existed for decades before that, when Britain had their idea on colonizing that part of the world for their own imperial purposes. And so like Lord Balfour, who was an anti-Semite, who was saying we're taking too many, this is in the, like around the turn of the century in early 1900s, saying we're taking too many Jewish refugees in. We basically need, we can kill two birds. We don't need to take the Jews here. We can send them to colonize Palestine for us. And ultimately you need to look at, like, it's the same way Irish folks in New York. A lot of those folks came to New York because of the Irish potato famine. A lot of Irish people also participated in the draft riots where they killed black people because they didn't like that the Civil War was becoming about slavery. And just because you acknowledge that, say, Irish immigrants had a big hand in those racist draft riots doesn't mean you are denying the reality and the brutality and the crime that was the Irish potato famine. Right, and Britain's role in that. So I think, like, I don't think it's about like those individual people. Yes. I think you have to look at this as a large scale project. It's
a conflation of an individual's like understandable desire. Say you are a Jewish person in Europe and your family has been ravaged by the horrors of the Holocaust. It's understandable that people might seek a home in Israel and that there was a migration movement there for that purpose. But that says nothing about the underlying critique, which is a colonial critique of the formation of Israel, which is like, none of us here say Israel should not like, we understand that Israel exists and Israel is a country, but they are denying Palestinians the right to exist in their area, which was conquered and colonized. We understand, like, speaking about that or maybe conquered is the wrong word, but at the very least colonized. And there was a large project that was undergone that tried to claim that land was not really being inhabited by anyone who was Palestinian, and it was just there for the taking, which is not, that's ahistorical, and it's not a reality. There were hundreds of thousands, over millions of people living in that area, and the consequences of that are still being felt to this day. And
I don't think, like, when you see chants like death to Arabs happening and the sort of attacks on Palestinians as a ramp up basically to campaigns, what's operative there isn't their remembrance of the Holocaust. What's operative there is basically the old British imperial, we need to get a foothold in this region to control the Arabs. Like, that's what I hear in death to Arabs when you hear that at Israeli soccer games. Like, that, I wish the Holocaust memory was more active in a more helpful way, but, like, I don't think any sort of Zionist who doesn't have living memory of that, who's basically my age, I don't think they have anything to tell me about the Holocaust, because like when I see what's going on in that part of the world and the enforcement of apartheid and the enthusiastic sort of culture of suppression in Israel, like I think it's horrifying, and I just don't think you can dive back to like early utopian views about it. The reality is here.
I mean, but you said it in the use of utopia, Matt. Like that's enough there. That's enough to say, you know, there. And you also can make a even more generous case to talk about generational trauma from the Holocaust and how that might affect like the way that certain Israelis view Palestinians in like a militancy and and an aggressiveness in the way that they oppress them, but the oppression is what should be front and center. Yeah, like my ancestors didn't come to North Dakota, live in a sod house for the first year and sort of homestead because they wanted to be a white supremacist sort of paperweight to keep out Native Americans. They did it because of, you know, family myths like persecuted for being Catholic and that sort of thing. But that's what the function we served, and that's why like the American government was so pleased to allow us that opportunity, right? Right, and making it like about your individual family and their struggle, them or no, even is like, heroic, like yeah. No, I understand that, but like the oppressors want it to be about like the conversation to be about your individual family is immoral for living in the way that you do or living where you do, as opposed to it just being like these are systemic things and we're not necessarily placing individual blame on any family or person unless it's like, you know, you're an IDF person who is shooting and bombing Palestinian kids. Actively propagandizing for it. Right. But yeah, like people, this is why I love the work of Thomas Pynchon so much, because it is people understanding that your own immediate motives and understandings, they're fine. But if you don't have an understanding of the broader power structures you're in, you might just be a sort of agent unwittingly for power structures. And like, I mean, that's where we're at. So I just wanted to address that, and I understand people like, it's not entirely fair. I don't think, and there's differences in the comparison between obviously Jim Crow and Israel, but I do think like especially the distortion that money in support of Israeli apartheid is having on the progressive side, where like if you run for national office as a progressive, you need to be worried about them flooding your race with cash.